Something is happening in the United States right now that is going to affect every single one of us, whether we realize it yet or not. On the surface, it looks positive. Major corporations are restructuring. They're investing heavily in artificial intelligence. They're trimming payroll expenses. They're increasing efficiency. Shareholders are optimistic. Analysts are calling it strategic positioning for the future. But underneath that surface-level optimism is a developing structural issue, one that directly affects retirement in America. If you plan to retire in this country at any point in the future, whether that's 5 years from now or 30 years from now, this is something you need to understand. Let's begin with what triggered this discussion. Microsoft recently announced its first ever voluntary employee buyout program. Roughly 7% of its U.S. workforce may be affected. At first glance, that doesn't sound catastrophic. Companies restructure all the time. Technology companies especially pivot resources to new priorities. In this case, Microsoft is redirecting capital toward artificial intelligence infrastructure and development. That sounds like innovation. That sounds like growth. And in many ways it is. Artificial intelligence is becoming embedded in nearly every major sector. Healthcare, finance, logistics, retail, education, manufacturing. Companies that fail to integrate AI risk falling behind. So leadership teams feel pressure to invest aggressively. But here's the concern that almost nobody is connecting to the retirement system. When companies reduce workforce size, whether through layoffs or buyouts, they reduce payroll tax contributions. And Social Security is funded primarily through payroll taxes. Every employee pays 6.2% of their wages into Social Security. Employers match that with another 6.2%. Combined, that's 12.4% of wages flowing into the system. If employees exit the workforce, those contributions stop. If enough employees exit, the revenue stream declines. Now layer that onto something we already know. Social Security is projected to face funding shortfalls in the early 2030s. Current projections suggest that if Congress does nothing, benefit payments could automatically be reduced to roughly 76% to 78% of scheduled benefits once the trust fund reserves are depleted. That's a reduction of around 22% to 24%. That's not small. Now think about what happens if payroll contributions shrink while retiree claims continue rising. Because here's the second part of the equation. We are experiencing a massive wave of retirements. Baby boomers are aging into retirement every single day. Thousands of Americans become eligible for Social Security each day. The ratio of workers to retirees has been declining steadily for decades. Decades ago, there were roughly 5 workers for every 1 retiree. Today, it's closer to 3 workers per retiree. If AI-driven restructuring reduces workforce participation further, that ratio could tighten even more. Now let's talk about buyouts specifically. Voluntary buyouts tend to target older workers, people with long tenure or those near retirement age. In Microsoft's case, the buyout program applies to employees whose age plus years of service equals 70 or more. That likely means many participants are in their late 50s or early 60s. If they accept the buyout and retire early, they stop paying payroll taxes immediately. Then within a few years, sometimes immediately, they begin collecting Social Security benefits. So from the system's perspective, you lose a contributor and gain a beneficiary. Multiply that by thousands, multiply that across industries. Now layer in AI automation beyond just buyouts. As AI systems become more capable, some roles will require fewer human employees. That doesn't mean mass unemployment across all sectors, but it does mean structural workforce changes. If technology reduces the need for human labor in certain areas, payroll tax contributions decline unless new job categories emerge at equivalent scale. The Social Security system was designed around a labor-intensive economy. It assumes steady payroll growth. It assumes rising wages and expanding workforce participation. If AI disrupts that assumption, funding models need to adapt. Now let's introduce another layer. There are ongoing discussions in Washington about how to address Social Security's projected shortfall. Some proposals suggest increasing the payroll tax rate. Currently, it's 12.4% combined. There have been discussions about raising it to 14%, 15%, or even higher. That would mean workers paying more out of every paycheck. Others propose raising or eliminating the wage cap, the maximum income subject to Social Security tax. Some propose gradually increasing the retirement age. Others suggest modifying cost of living adjustments. There have even been proposals to cap benefits for high-income retirees, limiting how much wealthy couples can receive annually. Each proposal has trade-offs. Raising taxes burdens younger workers. Reducing benefits impacts retirees who planned around expected payouts. Raising the retirement age affects physically demanding professions more severely. Means testing introduces fairness debates about entitlement versus need. But here's the deeper issue few are addressing. If AI meaningfully reduces payroll-based contributions, simply tweaking tax rates may not fully solve the structural gap. The funding model itself may need reevaluation. Now consider the generational tension. Current retirees understandably want full benefits. Many have paid into the system for decades. They planned around expected payouts. They built retirement budgets around projected Social Security income. Younger workers, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, increasingly question whether the system will deliver what they're promised. Some express skepticism about paying higher payroll taxes into a system projected to change significantly before they retire. That skepticism isn't necessarily rebellion, it's uncertainty, and uncertainty is growing. Now let's zoom out further. Artificial intelligence could increase corporate productivity and profitability. It could increase GDP. It could generate new industries. But those macroeconomic gains don't automatically translate into payroll tax revenue unless they are tied to wage growth and employment. If productivity rises but labor participation falls, payroll tax-based systems feel strain. Social Security is not funded by corporate profits. It's funded by wages. So here's the uncomfortable question. If the economy becomes more capital-intensive and less labor-intensive, how do we sustain a payroll-based retirement system? That's not a political question. That's structural math. Now let's talk about what happens if nothing changes. If projections hold and no reforms occur, benefit reductions in the early 2030s become automatic under current law. That doesn't mean Social Security disappears. It means benefits are reduced to match incoming payroll revenue. If payroll revenue shrinks further due to workforce reductions, that percentage could be lower than current projections. That's why workforce trends matter. It's not about one company's buyout program. It's about cumulative shifts across industries. Now let's address another dynamic, early retirement incentives. When companies offer buyouts, many older workers accept them because they feel uncertain about long-term job security or because the package seems generous enough to bridge them into retirement. Early retirement increases benefit claims sooner. That accelerates outflows. At the same time, younger generations may not be entering the workforce at the same rates in certain sectors. Entrepreneurship, gig work, freelance contracting, these often generate less stable payroll tax contributions. Some independent contractors underreport income. Others shift toward income categories not subject to traditional payroll structures. All of this complicates funding predictability. Now layer in inflation. Cost of living adjustments increase benefit payouts when inflation rises. While that protects purchasing power for retirees, it increases system outflows. Higher inflation means higher payouts. If payroll revenue doesn't rise proportionally, the gap widens. Now let's consider another scenario. What if AI creates entirely new job categories and wage growth increases substantially? That could offset losses. If productivity gains translate into higher wages, payroll contributions could rise. But that outcome depends on how companies distribute productivity gains. Will savings from automation increase wages, or will they primarily increase margins? That remains to be seen. So what does this mean for individuals? First, it means relying exclusively on Social Security as a retirement strategy carries risk. Second, it means understanding that policy reform is likely, whether through higher taxes, reduced benefits, raised retirement age, or some combination. Third, it means building additional retirement assets outside of Social Security is becoming more critical. 401ks, IRAs, pensions, real estate, business ownership, diversification matters. Now let's talk about psychology. Many Americans assume Social Security will figure itself out. Historically, Congress has intervened before full insolvency. That may happen again, but the type of intervention matters. Raising payroll taxes to 15% or higher affects take-home pay immediately. Gradually raising retirement age affects long-term planning. Capping benefits affects higher-income retirees disproportionately. No solution is politically easy, and the political difficulty increases as demographics shift. Now let's consider something else. The perception of AI as purely beneficial for economic growth may obscure second-order consequences. Efficiency gains can be positive, but systems built around labor-based funding models must adapt when labor dynamics change. Retirement security isn't just about individual planning, it's about system design. And right now, system design assumptions are being tested. So what can you do? First, assume Social Security will change. Second, build flexibility into your retirement timeline. Third, consider how policy shifts could affect you differently depending on your age. If you're currently collecting benefits, reforms are less likely to impact you dramatically, though nothing is guaranteed. If you're 10 to 20 years away from retirement, plan conservatively. If you're 30 years away, assume structural changes are almost certain. That doesn't mean panic, it means preparation. The key takeaway is this: AI-driven corporate restructuring may accelerate workforce shifts. Workforce shifts affect payroll tax contributions. Payroll tax contributions fund Social Security. Social Security already faces projected shortfalls. These forces intersect. Retirement in America is evolving. Whether AI ultimately strengthens the economy or introduces structural imbalance depends on how policy adapts. But one thing is clear: planning based solely on current assumptions is risky. Retirement security in the next several decades will likely look different than it does today. The earlier you acknowledge that, the better positioned you'll be. So the question becomes, should payroll taxes increase? Should benefits be capped? Should retirement age rise? Or does the funding model need a broader redesign in an AI-driven economy? There isn't a simple answer, but ignoring the structural shift doesn't make it disappear. The system is changing, and preparation, not assumption, is the smartest path forward.